I stood in the shadows of the grand ballroom at Claridge's, watching the spotlight bathe my husband's family in golden light. My name is Clara Wren, and I'd spent months designing this space for the Langley Foundation's annual charity gala. Every velvet drape, every crystal chandelier, every hand-stitched linen chosen to scream elegance without shouting. This was my work, my vision. But as I twisted the pearl ring on my finger, a gift from my grandmother, I realized I'd been erased from my own creation. The stage was crowded with Langleys. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, stood center, her emerald gown catching every eye, her voice smooth as she thanked donors for their unwavering support. Her husband, Edward, beamed beside her, all aristocratic charm. Their daughter, Sophie, was there too, whispering to my husband, Hugo, as if I didn't exist. I'd been told to oversee the staff tonight, kept backstage like a servant, while the family took the spotlight. But I was fine with that. I was used to working behind the scenes. Until Beatrice's next words hit me like a slap. "We're thrilled to welcome Miss Amelia Vaughn to our foundation's board," she said, gesturing to a poised woman in the front row. "Amelia's grace and vision make her the ideal partner for our family. Dare I say, the daughter-in-law we've always dreamed of." The crowd laughed a polite ripple, but I felt it in my bones. Hugo chuckled on stage, his eyes flicking to Amelia, not me. Sophie clapped her smile sharp. I gripped the pearl ring, its cool surface, the only thing keeping me from trembling. I should have been up there. I'd designed the gala, secured, half the sponsors spent sleepless nights ensuring every detail was perfect. But my name wasn't on the program. Not a mention, not a nod. I was Hugo's wife, but to the Langleys, I was invisible, a middle-class girl from Bristol who'd somehow tricked her way into their world. I slipped out to the service corridor, needing air, needing anything to dull the ache in my chest. That's when I heard them, Hugo and Sophie, their voices low but clear through the cracked door. Amelia's perfect Sophie was saying, "Mother's right. Once the gala's over, you need to handle Clara. She's not one of us." Hugo's voice was calm, too calm. "I know. I'll deal with it after tonight. Amelia's already on board." Deal with it? My heart stopped. The man I'd married, the one who'd sworn to love me through every late-night sketch and every snide comment from his mother, was planning to replace me with Amelia. In front of London's elite in the space I'd built, they were rewriting my story. I leaned against the wall, the pearl ring digging into my skin. My grandmother had given it to me before she died, saying it was for the woman I'd become: strong, quiet, unbreakable. I'd worn it tonight to feel her with me, to feel like I belonged. Now it was all I had to hold on to. I could have stormed back in, made a scene, demanded my place. But that's what they expected, an outburst they could spin into proof I didn't fit. Instead, I straightened up, wiped my eyes, and made a choice. They wanted to erase me. I'd make sure they regretted it. 4 years ago, I was just Clara Wren, a 29-year-old interior designer with a tiny studio in Bristol and a head full of dreams. I'd grown up sketching floor plans on scrap paper, inspired by my grandmother's knack for turning small spaces into havens. When I met Hugo Langley at a London design expo, I thought I'd found someone who saw the world like I did, through texture's light possibility. He was charming with hazel eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and he spoke about his family's charitable foundation, like it was a calling, not a legacy. "You're a magician, Clara," he'd said, standing in my booth marveling at a mock-up I'd built. "We need someone like you." I thought he meant for me, not just my work. The Langleys were London aristocracy, their wealth woven into Mayfair mansions and country estates, their name synonymous with philanthropy. Beatrice Langley, Hugo's mother, had the poise of a queen and the warmth of a marble statue. Edward, his father, was all hearty handshakes until you crossed him. Sophie, Hugo's sister, was my age, but moved through life like she'd been handed a script for perfection. From the moment I stepped into their orbit, I felt like an outsider auditioning for a role I'd never get. It started subtly. Beatrice would call me Claire at dinners, her tone suggesting it was an honest mistake, though her eyes said otherwise. Edward would praise my designs, then credit them to the team in public. Sophie was sharper, her compliments laced with venom. "Your work's so Approachable, she'd say, sipping champagne as if approachable was a synonym for common. I'd smile, nod, and keep designing, telling myself it didn't matter. I was there for Hugo for the life we were building. But every slight was a pebble in my shoe, small but impossible to ignore. The real wounds came from Beatrice. A year into our marriage at a Langley estate dinner, she pulled me aside, her perfume sharp as her gaze. "You know, Clara, Hugo was meant for someone like Amelia Vaughn," she said, naming his ex, a polished heiress who'd grown up in their world. She understood our responsibilities. "You're different." She smiled like she was offering advice, but it cut deep. My grandmother had raised me after my parents died, teaching me to find beauty in simplicity, to value effort over pedigree. She'd worn that pearl ring every day, a quiet rebellion against a world that judged her for being less. Beatrice's words brought her back, and with her, the ache of losing the one person who'd seen me fully. I turned to Hugo, hoping he'd be my anchor. He wasn't blind to his family's behavior. He'd wince when Beatrice corrected my etiquette, or when Sophie forgot to invite me to events. But his response was always the same. A hug, a murmured, "They'll warm up, darling. Just give it time." Time didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. Beatrice started using my designs for every Langley event, galas, fundraisers, private dinners, without asking, then presenting them as family collaborations. Sophie would tweak my layouts last minute, claiming they needed refinement, and Edward would nod along, never once mentioning my name to donors. My work was their trophy, but I was their afterthought. Hugo's silence hurt most. I'd show him sketches, pour out ideas, and he'd listen with half an ear, distracted by his phone or his mother's latest demand. When I told him how Beatrice's comparison to Amelia made me feel, he sighed. "She's just nostalgic, Clara. Amelia's ancient history. You're my wife." But he never called Beatrice out, never stood up when Sophie excluded me from family outings to their Cotswolds estate. I started finding notes in his planner lunches with Amelia board catch-ups I wasn't told about. When I asked, he'd brush it off. "Work stuff, darling. You're too busy for that nonsense." I wanted to believe him, so I did, even as the doubts grew heavier. The gala was the breaking point. I'd thrown myself into it, not just for the foundation, but for Hugo to prove I could shine in their world. I'd spent months sourcing rare fabrics, hand-picking artisans, creating a space that felt like stepping into a dream. Beatrice had nodded approvingly at the plans, but her praise was always conditional. "It's adequate," she'd say, or "let's hope it meets our standards." I worked harder, stayed up later, ignored the exhaustion. I thought if I got this right, they'd finally see me. But they didn't. They never would. Standing in that corridor, hearing Hugo and Sophie plot my replacement, I saw it clearly. I wasn't just an outsider to them. I was disposable. The pearl ring glinted on my finger, and I thought of my grandmother, her voice steady as she'd said, "You don't need their approval, Clara. You need your own." I'd spent 4 years trying to fit into a family that wanted me gone. I was done begging for a place at their table. The morning after the gala, I woke up alone in our Kensington townhouse, the silence louder than the ache in my chest. Hugo had left a note on the kitchen island board meeting with Mother, home late. No mention of the night before, no hint of guilt for laughing, while his mother called another woman the ideal daughter-in-law. I poured tea, my hands unsteady, and stared at the pearl ring on my finger. My grandmother's voice echoed, "You're enough, Clara." But after last night, after hearing Hugo and Sophie plan to handle me, I wasn't sure I believed it. I could have confronted him. I could have waited for him to slink home and demanded the truth. But confrontation would have played into their hands. Beatrice would spin it as proof I was unstable, unfit for their world. Instead, I went to his study. Hugo's desk was a mess of papers and coffee cups, his laptop humming softly, still logged in. He'd always been careless like that, trusting the world to bend to his charm. I didn't plan to snoop, but the memory of Sophie's voice, "Amelia's already on board," pushed me forward. I needed answers. I opened his email, my pulse racing. A folder labeled "Foundation Accounts" caught my eye, buried in a chain of messages with Beatrice and an unknown contact. I clicked, expecting budgets or donor lists. Instead, I found a spreadsheet detailing transfers from the Langley Foundation's charity fund, millions of pounds, funneled to offshore accounts in the Caymans. The dates stretched back years, each entry labeled with cryptic codes like consulting or event costs. A memo from Beatrice to Hugo was attached. Ensure Amelia's firm handles the next transfer. She's discreet. We can't risk exposure before the gala. My stomach churned. The Langleys weren't just philanthropists. They were thieves siphoning money meant for orphans and hospitals into their own pockets. And Amelia, the ideal woman, was their accomplice. I kept scrolling, dreading what came next. Another email from Hugo to Amelia sent 2 days ago. Mother's right, you're the future. I'll end things with Clara after the gala. Meet me at the Savoy tomorrow. Attached was a draft press release titled Langley Family Welcomes New Chapter, announcing Hugo's amicable separation from me and his renewed partnership with Amelia Vaughn, a valued ally of the foundation. I froze, my breath shallow. Hugo wasn't just cheating, he was orchestrating my public humiliation, timed to coincide with the gala's glow. The press release even mentioned the event praising my contributions as a designer, before pivoting to Amelia's visionary leadership. It was a choreographed exit to erase me from their narrative. And the foundation's fraud, they'd kept me in the dark, using my designs to sell their lie while planning to discard me. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a betrayal of everything I'd built. I'd poured my soul into their galas, believing they were for good. I'd stayed up nights perfecting every detail, thinking it would earn me a place. But I was a prop, a backdrop for their deceit. My fingers brushed the pearl ring, and for a moment I wanted to rip it off to shed the weight of trying to be enough. I twisted it ready to let go, then stopped. My grandmother had worn this through harder days, through judgment and loss. She hadn't broken, neither would I. I snapped back to the screen, my mind sharp. I opened my phone and started photographing every document, spreadsheets, emails, the press release. I found a text thread between Hugo and Amelia, months old, full of plans for after. I screenshotted those too, my hands moving faster than my thoughts. Then I noticed a draft letter in Hugo's outbox, addressed to the gala's media team. Clara will not attend the closing remarks. Ensure Amelia is seated with the family. That was the final piece their plan to humiliate me publicly, to make my absence look like my choice. In 10 minutes, I had a digital arsenal proof of their fraud, their affair, their script to replace me. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud drive, one Hugo didn't know existed. My heart was still pounding, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. The Langleys thought they could control the narrative, but they'd forgotten who designed the stage. I knew a journalist, Emma Price, who'd covered the foundation's galas for The Guardian. She was sharp, ethical, and hated hypocrisy. I drafted an anonymous email from a burner account. The Langley Foundation is embezzling funds. Attached evidence includes financial records and internal communications. Verify before their gala closing tomorrow. I attached the key documents keeping the affair out of it that was personal, not public. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The pearl ring glinted as I closed the laptop. I wasn't the girl who'd begged for their approval anymore. I was the woman who'd built their world, and I'd make sure it crumbled under the weight of their own lies. The next day, I moved through the Langley townhouse like a shadow, my face calm, my hands steady. Hugo was already gone off to finalize gala details with Beatrice, oblivious to the storm I'd set in motion. I dressed for the closing night of the charity gala, a sleek black gown that felt like armor, and slipped my grandmother's pearl ring onto my finger. Its weight was different now, not a reminder of pain, but a promise I'd made to myself. The Langleys thought they could write me out of their story. Tonight, I'd let their own lies rewrite it for them. I'd spent the morning tying up loose ends. I called the gala's artisans, confirmed the lighting adjusted the floral arches, every detail perfect, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Emma Price, the journalist I'd emailed, had replied at dawn. This is explosive. I've verified the transfers with a source. Story goes live during the closing remarks. I didn't ask how she'd verified. Emma's reputation for digging deep was why I'd chosen her. I sent a follow-up still anonymous. Ensure the article mentions the foundation's public accounts. The donors deserve to know. My role as designer gave me access to the gala's media team, so I tipped them off about a major announcement during the speeches, knowing they'd amplify Emma's story when it dropped. I arrived at Claridge's early, slipping into the ballroom to check the setup. The space was a vision: ivory linens, cascading orchids, chandeliers casting a soft glow. Donors in tuxedos and gowns mingled their laughter, echoing off my handiwork. Beatrice was already holding court, her diamond necklace glinting as she greeted MPs and CEOs. Edward was at the bar, charming a group of bankers. Sophie flitted between tables, her smile practiced. Hugo stood near the stage, chatting with Amelia Vaughn, their heads bent too close. I stayed in the background, invisible, as they'd always wanted my phone buzzing with a single text from Emma 5 minutes. The closing remarks began. Beatrice took the stage, her voice regal, as she praised the foundation's tireless work. She introduced Hugo, who spoke about legacy and trust, his charm masking the rot I now knew. Amelia sat in the front row, her expression serene, as if she'd already claimed my place. Then it happened. A murmur rippled through the crowd phones, lighting up like fireflies. A journalist in the back stood holding up her tablet. "Mrs. Langley," she called, her voice cutting through the applause. "Can you comment on the Guardian's report that the foundation has diverted millions to offshore accounts?" The room froze. Beatrice's smile stiffened, her hand clutching her necklace. Edward's face drained of color. Hugo faltered mid-sentence, his eyes darting to Amelia, who looked like she'd been slapped. The journalist pressed on. The article cites bank records and internal emails. Donors are named. "Is this true?" Gasps spread as guests pulled out their phones' headlines, flashing "Langley Foundation Embezzlement Scandal Rocks Charity Gala." Beatrice tried to speak, her voice thin. "This is a misunderstanding. We'll address it." But the damage was done. Donors whispered some heading for the exits. Cameras clicked, capturing the Langleys unraveling. I stood in the wings, my heart steady. I hadn't thrown a tantrum or leaked the affair that was too small. I'd let the truth do the work, amplified by the stage I'd built. The Langleys' facade was crumbling, and they'd done it to themselves. I slipped out to the service entrance, ready to leave, but Hugo caught me in the corridor, his face pale, his tie askew. "Clara, what have you done?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. "This is a disaster. Mother's humiliated, the board's in chaos." I pulled free, my voice low but sharp. "I gave the truth a push, Hugo. You stole from children's hospitals. You planned to replace me with Amelia. Did you think I'd just disappear?" His eyes widened, guilt flickering. "I didn't want this. Mother pushed me. Amelia was her idea. I was going to tell you to fix it." "Fix it?" I cut him off, my pearl ring catching the dim light. "You fixed nothing for 4 years. You let them treat me like dirt, let them use my work, let them plan my exit. You don't get to play the victim now." He stepped closer, voice desperate. "Clara, please, we can work this out. I'll make it right." I looked at him, the man I'd loved, and saw only weakness. "You had your chance, Hugo. I'm done building your world." I turned, my heels clicking on the marble, and walked away, leaving him in the wreckage of his family's lies. By the time I reached the street, the night air was cool against my skin. My phone buzzed texts from Sophie, furious, and Edward demanding a meeting. I ignored them. The gala was over, and so was my marriage. I hailed a cab, the pearl ring a quiet weight on my finger, and gave the driver my hotel's address. The Langleys could clean up their mess. I was already gone. A year later, I'm standing on a sunlit balcony in Florence, the Arno River, glittering below like a ribbon of molten gold. The air carries the scent of espresso and blooming oleander, and the city hums with a warmth that seeps into my bones. I'm here for a meeting, one I never could have imagined. A year ago, a commission to design the interior of a historic palazzo for a global arts foundation. My studio, Wren Designs, is still small, but its name is starting to echo in the right circles that value craft integrity, and the kind of vision I've always carried. I touch the pearl ring on my finger, its smooth surface worn but radiant, and feel a quiet joy. This is what it means to be whole. The months after the gala were a slow unraveling, then a rebuilding. I left London the day after the scandal broke, checking into a modest hotel in Bloomsbury, with nothing but a suitcase and my laptop. I spent the first weeks untangling my life from the Langleys, transferring my contracts, securing my design's copyrights, and hiring a solicitor to ensure Hugo couldn't drag me into their mess. He didn't try. The Langleys were too busy salvaging what was left of their reputation. The Guardian article became a firestorm, though not the kind that burns out quickly. It sparked investigations by the Charity Commission, with donors pulling funds and MPs calling for audits. Beatrice stepped down as foundation chair, her name fading from society pages. Edward's investments took a hit as partners distanced themselves. Sophie's engagement to a minor royal was quietly called off her social calendar, emptier than ever. Hugo and Amelia parted ways. Rumor had it her discretion wasn't enough to save her from the fallout. The Langleys' world, once untouchable, was a house of cards in the wind. I didn't watch it unfold with glee. I didn't need to. My victory wasn't their ruin, it was my freedom. I moved to Florence on a whim, drawn to its history of artisans who built beauty from nothing. I rented a tiny studio overlooking a cobblestone street, its walls bare but full of potential. Wren Designs started with one client, a local gallery needing a refresh, then grew as word spread. My design's clean lines, warm textures, spaces that felt like home caught the eye of curators, then collectors, then the Arts Foundation that brought me here today. They didn't just want my work. They wanted me, Clara Wren, the designer who'd turned down a Langley contract to forge her own path. That was the recognition I'd never gotten from Hugo's family, and it meant everything. Hugo reached out, of course. 3 months after I left, a letter arrived at my old London address, forwarded by my solicitor. It was long, handwritten, full of apologies and promises. I was weak, he wrote. Mother controlled everything. I never stopped loving you. Can we meet? I read it in my Florence studio, sunlight streaming through the window, and felt only a faint echo of the pain. The man I'd loved was a stranger now, his words as hollow as his promises had been. I didn't reply. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer, and went back to my sketches. Some bridges don't need burning, they just need leaving behind. Beatrice sent a single email months later, offering to collaborate on a discreet project. I laughed, picturing her clutching her diamonds as her world shrank. I declined, citing a full schedule, and blocked her address. The Langleys were a chapter, closed their names, fading from my thoughts like ink in the rain. I think often of that night at Claridge's, standing in the shadows, while the Langleys claimed my work, my place. I used to see it as my lowest moment, proof I'd failed to belong. Now I see it as the spark that lit my way out. The Langleys didn't break me, they showed me what I could withstand. They thought they could erase me, but they only freed me to write my own story. I look down at the pearl ring, its soft sheen, a quiet testament to the woman I've become. My grandmother gave it to me when I was 16, her hands trembling, but her voice firm. "This is for you, Clara," she'd said. "For the days you need to remember you're enough." I didn't understand then, but I do now. I didn't need the Langleys' approval, or Hugo's love, or a name in their program. I needed my own. My phone pings a message from the foundation's director confirming tomorrow's meeting. They're calling my proposal visionary, a word Beatrice once reserved for Amelia. I smile, slipping the phone into my pocket. The river shimmers below, and I raise my espresso cup to the horizon, to the girl who walked away and found her place in the world. Here's to the shadows that teach us to shine.